Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm reviewing one of Hornby's latest Southern steam locos. I've heard quite a few people say that there are precious few Southern Railway steam locomotives in Hornby's range at the moment, and actually there are even fewer than that are new tooled or recently tooled. So today I decided to review one of Hornby's most recent Southern Railway steam locos, and that is of course this, the Lord Nelson class, one of the largest and most powerful Southern steam locomotives that was ever built. And this loco was released for the first time in 2019, so about 5 years ago now, although it's still one of Hornby's newest Southern locos. And what I remember about this is that it was very expensive. It came from a time where Hornby's prices were really increasing quite rapidly, and yet there was no massive improvement in terms of quality. And one of the things I really remember about this model is how light it was. I picked it up out of the box and was quite shocked by how lightweight it was, which was quite surprising given the nature of the prototype, obviously a very powerful loco. These days there are 4 different versions of the Lord Nelson class on Hornby's website, and they start at £205.99 RRP, and you can also pre-order them at the retailers for about £185, as you can see at the model centre there. I bought this though in 2019 for £153. And that means that the price has gone up by about 20% within the last 5 years, which I guess is pretty much in line with other models. Anyway, what is this model like? Is it worth all of that money? And how does it compare with new locos from Hornby produced in 2023 or 4? So let's get started and let's take a look. And you know what? Something tells me that I haven't misremembered how light this loco is. Feeling the box, yeah, it's pretty darn light. I was about to say it feels like there's no loco in there at all. That is an exaggeration, that's not true, but yeah, it's quite a light box. Anyway, if I show you the end of the box, you can see the version that I've gone for. So this is R3634, the Southern Railway Lord Nelson class, and this one's Sir Francis Drake number 851. And as you can see by the front of the box, this one is in the Southern Green, and I think there is a malachite version of this coming soon, which looks lovely indeed. But when I bought this one, it was this version that was the nicest in my opinion. Anyway, if I show you the back of the box, you can see that this was classified as a 7P, so a very powerful locomotive. Again, bear that in mind when I put this on the scales. And then in the middle of the box, we've got a brief history of the class in real life, and feel free to pause and read that if you'd like. And then on the far end of the box, you've got Hornby's diagrams, dated 2017, which figures because the model came out a couple of years after that. So it's following the 2-year development cycle, roughly speaking. Okay, let's take this out of the box then, and let's see what this is like. The Lord Nelson class. Oh, blimey, this one's a tight fit. I don't think they want you getting it out. Oh. Okay, so it's quite a different green really, as we often say about Hornby's locos. Yeah, the loco in the box looks more of an olive green, whereas this is a sort of deeper, richer green, would you say? I'm not very good at describing colour, but hopefully you can see that on the camera. Anyway, just an observation, doesn't matter too much. The loco in the box looks fantastic, doesn't it? Always a good livery from Hornby on Southern locos, which is why it's a shame that they don't do more of them. I think a lot of people have been keeping their fingers crossed for a new Southern loco in each Hornby range launch that comes along, and so far they've been disappointed in recent years. But anyway, I've got instructions here, so let's take a quick look. So this is for the Lord Nelson class, and inside we've got a bit about lubrication, so it's your standard job, the axles, the crank pins. There are some accessories to fit, quite a few actually. You've got various steps, buffer beam details and a few other pieces. Assembly, yeah, it's got Hornby's kind of standard drawbar connection, so you've got a metal drawbar and then a plug that goes into the tender. Body removal, yeah, again, that's a fairly standard thing. And as a slightly older model, this does have the 8-pin DCC socket, so if you want to chip these, you need an 8-pin decoder. And then on the back, yeah, just your usual bit about brake rigging. The loco brake rigging there looks quite interesting. So there you go. Let's pull out the accessory bag then and see what we get. There's quite a lot in there by the looks of things. All right, let's see. So the steps are painted, that's pretty cool. We've got the brake rigging in 2 pieces for the tender because it's a bogie tender, which is another interesting feature of these. You've got quite large pieces of pipework to fit. I assume they would probably interfere with the bogies, which is why they're not fitted from the factory. And we've got some pipework for the buffer beams, but no screw-link couplings, so that is a slight omission, unless it's fitted to the model already. But from what I remember, I don't think it is. Anyway, a few years old now, so what is the finish like? Let's take a look. Can't actually remember the answer to that. Let's see. All right, so it's perhaps not quite got the luxurious finish that we've seen on some of Hornby's later models, like the 2MT and the Turbo Motive. Obviously, unlike those models, this just has the plastic body, and again, I guess that's partly why this is so light. Is it as light as I remember? Yeah, for a large loco, there's not a lot of weight to this. Anyway, let me lift it up properly, and I'll show it to you. So, yeah, I think when you first grab your mitts around this loco, the first thing you notice is that it feels quite light and plasticky. But overlooking that, it's a decent looking model. The decoration is obviously great, and hopefully you can see that there's a fair bit of detail on this, and we'll go over all of that in just a second. But for now, let's have a bit of background on the Lord Nelson class in real life. The Southern Railway Lord Nelson class was introduced in 1926 when the first of 16 locos was built to the design of Richard Mansell. Initially, they were intended for use on continental boat trains between London and Dover, but eventually they were used for express passenger work. At the time, they were the latest and most powerful in a long line of Southern Region 460 locomotives, and they boasted a tractive effort of 149 kilonewtons. They were truly mighty engines, and they ran on 4 cylinders, and they had a boiler pressure of 220 psi. Mansell borrowed quite a few elements from the other railway's most successful steam locomotives for this design, but nevertheless things didn't go perfectly with the Lord Nelsons to start with. While plenty of crews got on fine with the class, others found it no better than smaller and lighter locos that it replaced, and there were plenty of reports of poor steaming. And Mansell tried everything to try and fix this problem. Smaller driving wheels to increase the power, larger and heavier boilers, but none of this stuff helped. It was eventually Oliver Bulleid who solved the problems by fitting larger diameter chimneys and multiple blast pipes, which immediately brought about massive improvements. The class was then very successful right up until the end of steam in the 1960s, with the final example not being withdrawn until 1962. Of 16 produced, only 1 has been preserved though, and it's the first of the class, number 850 Lord Nelson. Right, let's do the weigh-in then. So I've got 2 engines. The largest here is the Lord Nelson class, and I've got another engine here to compare it with. This is the N15, or the King Arthur, which in real life was quite a bit smaller than the Lord Nelson, as you can see it is, and lighter and weaker too. The Lord Nelson actually replaced them. So let's see what these weigh. Let's start with the smaller N15, or King Arthur to start with, see what that weighs. So that comes in at 412 grams, okay, so pretty respectable weight. Now let's put the larger Lord Nelson onto the scales and see how that compares. 311 grams, well, 312. So that makes it exactly 100 grams lighter than the smaller N15, and it's supposed to be a larger and more powerful engine than that. And that really just shows almost contempt for customers, really. It shows that Hornby were capable of producing a heavier model, and for some reason, with this new and super expensive release, they seemingly made it as light as they possibly could. And I guess they just expected nobody to notice. Well, bad luck, Hornby. And look at this, the tiny little 1500 from Rapido. It's heavier than it by quite a bit, and that doesn't have a tender or anything. And the reason is that the model is just incredibly plasticky, both in its construction and its detailing. And this does go for the pipework, which is plastic, but no complaints there, that's fairly standard, and the pipework does look good, it's well fitted, and the finish on that is great. But you've also got parts like the reverser rod, which just look like they're plastic. It doesn't have a real metallic finish at any rate, it's just got a painted finish. And same with the whistle too, which seems to be a little bit bent. The running plate is plastic, just a cheap plastic running plate. The body, plastic as well. Firebox, smoke box, all made of plastic. And you have to wonder, why did Hornby do this and then charge so much for it? It looks as though they were really just trying to squeeze every penny out of the poor customer. And I do suspect that it's this kind of attitude towards customers that has contributed to the tricky financial situation that Hornby find themselves in. I'm happy to say that in more recent years they've improved on this sort of practice. Some of their latest locos have had a lot more metal on board, and while they are still very expensive, at least the features kind of match the price. With this one, we've got a noticeable downgrade in the quality and weight of the model, and an increase in the price. And it looks as though Hornby are going to do this again with the latest batch of Lord Nelsons. Now, as far as I'm aware, this is just a new batch of the same model. I haven't seen that they've made any improvements to it. Although when the models do finally come out, I'll be very interested to see if they are any heavier, particularly now that they are way above the £200 mark. Anyway, let's look over the rest of the model. Let's talk about the decoration to start with, and there's good and bad in the decoration. The finish isn't the greatest in the world, but it's not the worst either. There is a slight satin finish to it, although it does look more plasticky than some of Hornby's later releases. Things like the lining and the banding though are done excellently. It looks great on the boiler, and the running plate is also very precisely lined. Some of the printed detail though really doesn't look good. The plate on the side of the cab is terrible. I can't read what that says. And that's because, well, it looks as though they've used a sort of metallic paint for the lettering, which has quite large metallic pigments in it, and that just makes it completely illegible, particularly in certain lights. Same sort of thing with the Sir Francis Drake nameplate. This is a metal nameplate, but it's not a proper etched one. The letters don't seem to stand out. They just appear to have been painted onto a flat plate, which is not a great look. And again, the text at the bottom there is completely illegible due to the poor quality of the paint. Hopefully these are things that will be addressed with the latest release of the Lord Nelson. Other than that though, we've got beautiful lining around the cab, the windows are glazed and we've got nicely painted window frames, and the steps underneath the cab are beautifully lined, and there's also quite a bit of painted pipework down here as well. Speaking of the pipework, most of the pipes on this model are separately fitted, and the finish of these parts is actually decent. I've actually seen worse looking pipes than these on later Hornby models. Here's a look at the buffer beam, which does have the coupling hook pre-fitted, although I don't believe any couplings came with these hooks. We do at least have metal buffers though, and these are sprung. Very nice. We've got pre-fitted lamp brackets on the buffer beam, and a very interesting looking smoke box door with a kind of bulge in the middle of it, which looks like some sort of moulding issue, but that is prototypical. That is how these Mansell smoke box doors looked. You will notice that this loco looks a little bit strange in that it doesn't have the smoke deflectors fitted, and that's kind of why I went for this version of the model, because it does look unusual without them. Although Hornby's tooling does allow them to produce Lord Nelsons with smoke deflectors, so if that's more your cup of tea, they should have a model for you as well. There's a fair bit of detail along the running plate as you can see, although as a 4-cylinder locomotive there is a surprising lack of detail between the frames. Up on top of the loco, the chimney and the dome are separately fitted, and surprisingly, the safety valves do appear to be made of metal, and they've kept their metal finish as well. They haven't been painted, and so they actually look a lot better than some of the other components on the model. Another area that looks great is the base. The wheels look wonderful, the model's axles have been covered over, and we've got the dummy axles painted up, which looks great. Same with the bogie wheels, and it's a beautifully detailed bogie as well with some decent riveting on it. And then the valve gear, coupling and connecting rods all look fantastic as well, and I have seen this model in motion, so I can guarantee that it all looks great. It is a beautifully detailed cab as well. We've got pre-fitted cab doors as well as a hinged tender foreplate, and the cab interior detail shows effort that seems to have been missed off of other parts of the model. So we've got fully painted gauges, separately fitted components, the regulator there, among other things, is separately fitted, and loads of these components have been picked out. It doesn't have any lighting in it, that's something that Hornby have only done more recently, but aside from that, the detail in the cab is just excellent. Let's take a look at the tender then, and it is an interesting tender because obviously it's a bogie tender. The bogies on the model are real and they move, unlike some. And that is another interesting thing about these models for me. Very rare to see this on British steam locos, and yet there are quite a few southern locos that have this feature. Anyway, the decoration is fine on the tender. The lettering looks better because it's not done with that metallic paint, it's a more yellow colour. And then we've got the lining around the body and the chassis and steps of the tender as well. We've got a very large coal load. These are massive tenders, so you can imagine how much fuel could be stored in this thing. And this load is removable as well, so if you wanted to add crushed coal, you could do. Plenty of detail around the back of the tender, including these water filler caps, and the lamp brackets around the back are separately fitted, so they're not part of the moulding. And we've also got a pre-fitted vacuum pipe and more sprung buffers. The coupling on the back of the tender is mounted to the rear bogie, so it should follow the curves of the track quite nicely. So I've got mixed feelings about this loco really. In many ways it's a beautifully presented loco with lots of great details and a good livery. But there are just one or two things that let it down from that point of view. Also, holding the model in your hands is obviously quite disappointing as well, because it's at least 100 grams lighter than it ought to have been and could have been. And I expect that this will really show through in the performance section. So let's get this down onto the track, let's talk about the mechanism, and let me show you how this runs. So there she is, the Hornby Lord Nelson down onto the track. And I think there's a lot of pros and cons in this model, but there's no denying how handsome this thing looks sitting on the track. Now, as you know, I like to try and be balanced in my reviews. I like to talk about the good and the bad in the model. And I've talked quite a lot about the bad in this model so far, but now we're going to move on and talk about the performance, and things are going to get a lot more positive. I think mechanism is something that Hornby really does quite well, and this loco is no exception to that. So first of all, there are tons and tons of pickups on this model. The tender has 8 wheels because it's a bogie tender, and all of these wheels have pickups on them. In addition to that, the loco driving wheels each have a pickup on them as well, so that makes 7 pickups per line, so you know this loco is going to be extremely reliable. The base keeper is screwed on, not clipped, which I like as well, and it's connected electrically to the chassis with these pogo pins, which means that you can fully remove the base keeper plate to clean the pickups, and also to access the bearings, which are proper separately fitted ones. So that is a real sign of quality. We've also got just a single driven axle, as usual from Hornby, which keeps the mechanism nice and simple. For body removal, I've already disconnected the tender, and there are 2 screws, one at the back underneath the drawbar and one at the front underneath the front bogie. And once those screws are undone, the body is removed very, very easily. So it's very easy to access the innards of this loco, which makes it very serviceable. And of course you've got the 8-pin decoder socket in the tender, which is similarly easy to access. So here's the loco chassis, which is die-cast, but it's not dreadfully substantial, hence the light weight of the loco. The front of the boiler and the smoke box are just an empty space, and you'd hope that they'd really pack this part of the body with metal to bring the weight up, but in this case they didn't. It really is just empty space. They have got a large 5-pole motor though, which looks good, and it's also got dual flywheels on it, which is a crazy feature really, very impressive. This is the same kind of motor that I've seen problems with in other locos, but I've not had any problems with this particular one, possibly because of how light the loco is. Maybe that's putting less strain on the motor, but either way this all seems fine. There's also no lights on this model at all, which is a shame for the price, but that's also quite typical of Hornby models from this period, so I guess that's fair enough. And then in terms of the gauge, it comes in with a back-to-back of 14.4 on each axle on average, which is bang on the standard, so no issues at all there. So finally, you are getting what you pay for here in the mechanism. Every part of it is nice and serviceable, and it's quality too, which is great. So with that, let's move on to performance and give this a bit of a test. And I've had this warming up, so it should be ready to go. So let me show you that. Beautiful start. And you can tell that there's a good quality mechanism in this one, just from seeing a few seconds of it run. Yeah, it's beautiful and smooth, very quiet, and the range of speeds is pretty sensible as well on this one. I'll run past at 50% speed for you. Here we go. 50. So it's really not too fast, which suggests decent gearing. I suppose it can also suggest poor torque, but if I put my fingers in front and turn it up to 50, you can see that it is able to turn its wheels. Now again, it's a lightweight loco. I guess if it was much heavier, it would be struggling, but because it's light, we don't see any torque issues with this loco. So I guess that's one small silver lining to this being so light. Another great aspect of this is the crawl, so let me demonstrate that. I'll see how slow I can make this go. I am turning it up now very gradually. Still turning up. I think I saw it. Yeah, starting to move. So that is really quite fantastic. So I think we've really found the strength of this model, and that is in the performance and the mechanism. And of course, because it's so serviceable, you're able to look after it better, and it should serve you for a lot more years. There you go, an acceleration. So yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a really gorgeous runner. And because it's a good looking model as well, once you get it on the track, and as long as you haven't got too many inclines or anything, it's going to be a beautiful performer. Speaking of pulling power, it's not amazing or anything, 0.38 newtons, which should be about 24 coaches on straight and level track. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it is beaten by a Bachmann pannier tank, of all things. It's not the most powerful in the world, but if you've got a relatively flat layout, it should be able to haul a decent number of coaches. Or at least that's what I'm hoping. I've set up a train of 7 coaches here, Southern coaches. Quite a big train really, but I really want to put this loco through its paces to see what it can do. So let's go and test the couplings. Let's back up and let me see how steady I can be. All right, here we go. Okay, I should be able to do this in a very controlled manner. Here we go. I mean, there we go, just incredible. So, Hornby Lord Nelson, decent sized train. Let's go for a bit of an express speed. Let's go up to 50 and let's see what it looks like. Here we go. There we go, looking beautiful. I do like a Southern loco. Anyway, I've got a few other 460s around the railway today, so see which ones you can spot. I do have an odd one out and a theme today. It's quite a tricky one this time though, but if you want to have a go at guessing, pop it down in the comments. Anyway, this loco on the middle line is the N15 in the black, the heavier loco. It's not as heavy as my green one, weirdly, but still pretty heavy, and that's got just a few passenger coaches. And then on the inside line, we've got the freight version of the N15, which is known as the S15. Pretty much the same sort of thing, but with smaller driving wheels, so makes it slower and a bit more powerful. Anyway, let's catch up with Lord Nelson, and let's see how it's getting on with those coaches. Alright, here she goes. Decent speed, but not too fast. And around the second radius, yeah, no slowing down. That's really good. And to say how light the loco is, it's actually handling the slight incline there pretty well. Yeah, I'm quite surprised by that. So that's not bad at all. That's not bad. I didn't even see any wheel slipping. So I'm guessing the wheels on this loco must be pretty grippy. That said, if you want to do some truly long Southern trains and your layout isn't completely flat, I would still expect to see some trouble. Having said that, there is that cavity inside the loco boiler and smoke box, so if you do get one of these and you find it a little bit light-footed, it should be possible to find some nice heavy things to put into that smoke box and improve the weight a little bit. I haven't done that myself because it's actually handling things okay on my layout, but if you have got inclines and things, that will be something you want to try. But anyway, all the faults aside, this thing does look fantastic as it runs along. It is nicely detailed, it is well painted on the whole, at least from a distance, and when you mix in that great performance that it's got, it really is a beautiful model. So for the 150 quid or so that I spent, I'm perfectly happy with this. I think at the time when I bought this, it felt a bit more of a burn because obviously money was worth more back then. But thanks to inflation, this actually seems like a pretty good deal when I look at the price today. That's the price I paid, of course. The latest RRP has adjusted for that quite adequately, and it's still a bit too pricey for what it is, in my opinion. But what it also is a beautiful loco that runs really, really well. And now then for some ratings on the Hornby Lord Nelson class. I've given the level of detail 3.5. Now there's a lot of good detail on this. The cab I think is a real highlight, loads of decoration and different parts inside the cab, really impressive. Some parts of the decoration are really good as well. I mean, the lining is all perfect. It's also got a few other impressive features like sprung buffers and tons of separately fitted pipework. On the downside though, it is missing lighting, which is kind of an expected feature today. The painted nameplates and the plates on the side of the cab really don't look that great, almost illegible in some places, so poor quality paint there. Quite a few plastic details, some of these look okay, others, like the reverser rod, just don't. And it also didn't come with screw link couplings for the buffer beam. The performance though was really solid, so I've given it 5 star. Great crawl, really nice and controlled at the slow speeds. Doesn't run too fast at the high speeds either, although it does run with decent torque. I think if the loco was a heavier loco, ironically, then the torque could have been worse, as we've seen with other locos with this kind of motor. But because it's lightweight, it doesn't slow down around the curves, and because of all those pickups, it's also very reliable, even over the largest of my insulated points. The pulling power then, with the tractive effort of 0.38 newtons, isn't too bad. That should be 24 coaches on straight and level track, although do bear in mind, because of the lightweight nature of the loco, if you do have inclines on your layout, you will find this loco very underpowered. But yeah, on straight track, it's absolutely fine. The mechanism I've also given 5 stars. I can't fault it. It's high quality and it's serviceable. We've got so many pickups in both the loco and the tender, which make it, like I say, perfectly reliable. Seems to have a decent motor, 5-pole motor, dual flywheels, that's really awesome. Proper bearings on the driving axles, easy to get the base keeper off, easy to remove the body. Benefit of the doubt on the 8-pin DCC socket. That is a little bit dated by today's standards, but this loco is a few years old now, so I will overlook that. Quality then, I've given a middle of the road 3 star. It's a bit of a mixed bag really. The build quality is absolutely fine, with the exception of the issues in the decoration. The paintwork is nice and crisp, there's no sort of splodges of paint or anything like that, and all of the details are fitted cleanly with no visible glue. On the other hand though, we've got the issue of plastic construction. It's a very light loco. The bodywork and a lot of the details are all made of plastic. 311 grams, I would say that's more than 100 grams lighter than it ought to be of a loco of this size. And as I also say, the quality of the paint on the nameplates and also on the sides of the cab really isn't very good. We've seen Hornby do a lot better. So 3 star, some good, some bad. Value for money then. Now the price I paid is £153. That was a few years ago now, but I think by modern standards that's a fairly decent price. I think the loco could have been better for that money, but overall that's a fair price. I'd give that 4 star. The latest RRP though is £205.99, which is really taking advantage a bit here. It's a light loco with limited features, and there are plenty of other models that are newer and cheaper than this that do better. Do bear in mind though, the issues with the decoration may have been addressed on Hornby's latest releases, so to be fair, that might not be an issue with those models at the latest RRP. Anyway, I'd give that £205 RRP 2 star, so I'll split the difference and give it 3 overall. Overall then, that is 7.38 out of 10, a kind of middle of the road score. It gets a grade D because the quality and the features don't really match the price, and I think such a lightweight loco that's so plasticky is unacceptable for £150 to £200. Into the logbook we go, and it is 3rd place above the Bully Booster and below the 2MT. It's a gorgeous looking loco with some good details, but I could only really recommend this if it's at a significant discount. Well folks, there you have it, a fresh look at the Hornby Lord Nelson class. Yeah, overall not a bad loco really, but considering this is one of Hornby's latest Southern locos, does kind of go to show that they have neglected the Southern Railway a little bit in recent years, because this is the kind of the best they've got to show for it. So what I'd really love to see is some new tooled Hornby Southern locos. Maybe not a 460, maybe some other part of the Southern Railway fleet, but done to Hornby's modern standards. So die-cast construction, maybe a little bit of lighting, high quality decoration, lots of detail, that kind of thing. Alternatively, I'd also love to see a more budget offering. A loco that's still nicely put together and it still runs well with a good mechanism, but perhaps with a few of the features cut back to make it more affordable. And that would probably look a lot like this Lord Nelson, because yeah, it is quite light on features, except it would have a slightly more reasonable price, and perhaps not quite as many details as this has. But anyway, that's what I'd like to see. Please do comment down below, let me know what you think about this. Have you got a Lord Nelson? Are you going to get a model from the latest batch? Well, if you do, please come back to this video and let me know what it's like in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed having another look at the Lord Nelson with me, and I'll catch you very, very soon for another review. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.